Hi, I'm Amy and this is A Star Reads, and welcome to my book tag video. I was tagged by Pae Veo from Attention, and if you haven't seen his channel, I recommend it. He is so much fun because he's very unique, he's very creative, he's got a lot of different talents, and one of the things he does quite a bit on his channel now is stop motion clay animation. So much fun. But his channel is also a challenge, and I mean that in a good way, because he is always having these very important conversations around the literary history and the philosophy of these different literary movements and genres and books that he's looking at, authors. I'm always blown away by his channel, and I always am learning something new. If you get a chance to check him out, I highly recommend it. I'm a big fan. So he tagged me in the Low Key Eff 2020 book tag, which was originally created by the channel Happy For Now, and I will link all the information you need for Pae's channel as well as Happy For Now down in the description box below. So this tag was for 2020, and I'm a bit behind. Pae tagged me in January, and I just haven't had a chance to get to it yet, but I'm doing it now. I'm gonna make it work, even though it's a little bit of an older tag. So bear with me. Some of these answers may have to be manipulated a little bit because they're really for 2020. First question, share some good stuff that happened in 2020. I find that in some of my reflections, like in my Feel Good Challenge and whatnot, I've done this a bit, so I'm not gonna go too much into detail, but I will talk about three things. One is the most obvious. I started a booktube channel, and this has brought a lot of light into my life during a year that there was just a lot of not light. The second one was in the fall of last year, I took a physics course, which was physics as an educator, so teaching young kids how to learn physics. And physics has never been my favorite course, ever. I like learning about it from like documentaries and stuff, but it just wasn't my favorite. Okay, let's just say that. It wasn't my favorite. However, I loved this course, and I loved learning about the theories and the ideas behind physics in a way that I actually really understood. It's kind of sad that I had to be in this very basic class where you're teaching elementary school students physics to finally learn some of the concepts that I could never really understand in all the physics courses I took. So I really actually loved my course back in the fall, and it also prepared me for school because I'm gonna be starting school here in the end of March. So I'm like really ready now. I'm ready to start teaching. And the third thing is kind of surprising because we didn't really get to see family and friends that much in 2020, but I feel like I was in contact with a lot more family and friends. I felt like it was a good year for Zoom calls and emails and phone calls and all these different ways of being in contact with people who you kind of, those relationships, especially the ones that are further away, sometimes get put on the back burner when life gets busy. So I felt like last year was a good time to focus on those. And so that was a really positive thing actually that came from it. Question number 2, what book did you love at the beginning of the year? So at the beginning of the year, I really was mostly reading nonfiction books for my nonfiction book club. And the book that first came up that I would say I gave at least a 4 stars to was Caesar's Last Breath, The Epic Story of the Air Around Us by Sam Kean. I gave that 4.5 stars. And I actually really loved this book. It was based on the history and the chemistry of air, individual parts of the air. So you take all the air that's around us, and Sam Kean was looking at the individual atoms within air and discussing the history behind them. So like argon, nitrogen, oxygen. So each chapter would go through each element and discuss not even just recorded history, but also the history of that element on planet Earth, all the way through the present day, which discusses like what's happening within the atmosphere, but also practical applications of that atom. So it was a fascinating science book, but it was written very colloquially. So I feel like people who are not necessarily science lovers could really enjoy this. I thought. I enjoyed it, which doesn't say much because I'm a science lover. Excited to read more from Sam Kean. I like his writing style. He's also written The Disappearing Spoon, which is very famous. And so at some point, I'll get on to more of his writing. The only thing about it was, you can tell he's a journalistic writer because even though he got his degree, I think in physics, he's definitely gone the route of writing. He's wanted to be a writer more so than anybody working in science. He starts talking towards the end in this very speculative way that just kind of took on this strange tone to the book. And I didn't dislike it, but it was kind of like, whoa, there's no empirical evidence behind that. You're just making stuff up. And so it was enjoyable, but it was kind of like, what are you doing? This is not science. Fascinating read. It's called Caesar's Last Breath because he talks about how Caesar's breath The air that came out of Caesar's last breath is still surrounding us, and we've all come into contact with it at some point, just the way air works. Question number 3, a book you were looking forward to that ended up being not great. Okay, so I have one for this. During the Indigathon in November, I was reading all books by Indigenous authors. One of the books I really liked was this middle grade horror thriller by Joseph Bruchac called The Skeleton Man. I think I gave it at least 4 stars, and it was really good. It was very creepy for a middle grade book, and I was very impressed how well Joseph Bruchac made this a scary book, even that adults would be like, ugh. And so of course, then I was really excited about reading the second book in the duology, which was The Return of Skeleton Man by Joseph Bruchac. And it was not good. It wasn't a book that I enjoyed. There were a lot of reasons for it. He had a lot of ideas in there that I thought were good ideas, but they could have all been separate books. Felt like he was just trying to get all his ideas that he had out into one book. And I was really bummed about that because of how much I loved the first book and how well I thought the first book was written. Question number 4, a book that surprised you this year. For this one, I'm gonna go with I Can Make a Promise by Christine Day. And this was a 5-star book, and I loved it so much. It was about this young girl who is learning about her Indigenous family history, and she's finding out some unsavory things about what happened with her grandmother and things that really affected her whole family. And it's so beautiful, so well done. The way that Christine Day was able to represent this 12, 13-year-old so accurately, I was so impressed. It made me feel really strong feelings. I felt like the heart was really in this book. I'm so excited about this that I actually have Christine Day's next book on my library waiting list, because there's quite a few people also waiting for it. It just came out, I think, in January, and so I'm like, oh, I didn't know there was another one. I'm so excited. So I plan on reading a lot of Christine Day's work. I hope that this next book is as good as the first one, because if it is, then she could easily become a favorite writer. Okay, so question number 5 is a book that you like that nobody else does, or a book that no one talks enough about. And I actually went with the second part of the question because I feel like there weren't a lot of books on my list that I absolutely loved that most people hated. I want to talk about books that I really enjoyed that have very few ratings on Goodreads. And I'd like to get the word out there so more people hear about them and pick them up. The first one was Those Who Run the Sky by Aviak Johnston. This was 125 ratings on Goodreads, so not well read. She's an Inuit writer that writes middle grade stories based off folklore and old storytelling of the Inuit culture. And I thought it was beautiful. It had the Arctic setting. I think I gave this book at least 4 stars. The characters were so likable, and that was really the kicker for me, is how much I liked the characters, because there were a few moments in this that I felt like the story slowed down a bit, and I don't know that the pacing was perfect the whole time, but I liked the characters well enough, and I liked the whole overall storyline that didn't matter. And so if you haven't had a chance to read this, if you like middle grade books, this one needs to be read more. I'm definitely gonna read more of Aviak Johnston's writing because I really enjoyed it. The next one is Britfield and the Lost Crown by C.R. Stewart, and this was 254 ratings. I actually got this book as a NetGalley ARC, and I really enjoyed it. It was so much fun. It was about these 2 orphan children that escape from the orphanage and go off on this adventure. They're running away. They're trying to find out more about the boy's family. It's a thrilling book. The adventure is exciting, but also the history that C.R. Stewart incorporates into this book was really fascinating and interesting to me. And as a kid, I would have loved it. I don't know if all kids would love it. Maybe people wouldn't like it if they're not really into history, but I thought it was so well done. And I thought that the pacing was great, and I loved the characters. I even loved the characters you don't like. It was good. I will definitely read the next one. The next one's an interesting question. It's a book you want to come out already this year, meaning in 2020. Well, 2020's passed. The books that were gonna come out came out. But the book that I was most excited to read that came out at the end of 2020 was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I have yet to read it. So shows you how much new releases actually affect my life. Not much. I really get excited about the books that are gonna be coming out, but I don't keep too much track of new releases. I do have Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I really wanna read it, but it just hasn't happened yet. And the next question is sort of along those same lines. What book were you looking forward to that got pushed to 2021? And I, be honest, I don't know. I don't really pay attention to new releases at this point. If I hear about them and they're coming out, I can be excited about them, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'll pick them up right away. There weren't any books that I was anticipating in 2020 that I know got held back, because I usually only hear about them after they've been released. So that's not really the best answer, but that's what I have. And then finally, question number 8, what book will you think of when you think of 2020? this is kind of an interesting one. And I actually chose two books that I read in 2020 that I thought maybe not necessarily were what I think of when I think of my favorite books from 2020, but they're what I think of when I think about the year of 2020. So the first one was Spillover, Animal Infections and the Next Human Pandemic by David Quammen. And I read it because the pandemic had started and I wanted to read more about zoonotic viruses. I really did want to learn more about these viruses like coronavirus that were affecting the world. This was written, I think, a year or so before coronavirus happened. But so much that I read in this book was very predictive of what ended up happening within the pandemic. If you'd like to understand more about this virus or viruses like this in general, I highly recommend this book. I felt it was very readable. There were moments when it was a little more scientific and it might turn off some of the people who don't love science as much. But that being said, I feel like there's so much you can learn about our current situation just from this book, and see how common these kind of viruses actually are. It also shows how the way that we live our life within the planet is actually gonna cause more viruses like this to be possible. The next book that I felt like was appropriate for 2020 was The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. I listened to this on audiobook this year for my book club as well, and it was very appropriate. It was a great book. It was very statistical, and I felt like that was the part that maybe was a little dense, but the conversation behind this and the history that Michelle Alexander goes over is very important to understanding the Black Lives Matter movement even more, and looking at a history that a lot of white people have been pretty blind to and have not paid attention to because it doesn't affect us directly, but it does affect everyone. And that's why I thought this book was so important, because it really showed you how being blind to all the things that are going on is a problem for everybody and not just a problem for the Black community. It's so important to understand how much of an impact we all have and how we're all hurting ourselves and everybody around us by trying to stick our head in the sand. So I thought that was a really good book and it was appropriate for the climate of 2020. So that's it. Those were all the questions, and I'm actually not going to tag anybody in this. If you're interested in it and you like the questions, I feel like it's a great tag and I think that you should try it out. However, it really was meant to be done, in 2020, so no pressure. No pressure. Do it if you feel like it. And if you do, let me know in the comment section down below because I'd like to see your answers. And also don't forget, check out Pae's channel. So click the like button if you enjoyed this video and subscribe now if you want to see more of my tag videos. I got a few others that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that, and thank you so much for watching.